This has been a pretty big couple weeks for Fujifilm. First of all, we had the release of the X100V, and this was followed up this week with the announcement of the XT4. Now, we do know that there are 4 lenses coming this year, only one of which we actually know what it is. It's going to be the 50mm f1.0, but I want to do some speculation and talk about lenses in the Fujifilm system. But first, I want to give a quick shout out to our sponsor today, who are the awesome folks over at Skillshare.com. So it's a whole new year, and it's time to explore new skills and get lost in creativity. Well, Skillshare's online courses are here for you. What you find might just surprise and inspire you. Skillshare is an online learning community that offers membership with meaning. With so much to explore, real projects to create, and the support of fellow creatives, Skillshare empowers you to accomplish real growth. Skillshare offers classes designed for real life so that you can move your creative journey forward without putting your life on hold. You can learn and grow with short classes that fit your busy routine. Whether it's video, photography, or any other creative field, Skillshare have classes for everyone. One class that I've been working through recently was done by Ryan Booth, who's a filmmaker. This is called DIY Cinematography, Make Your Video Look Like a Movie. Ryan is incredible. He's had films at Sundance. He's worked for clients like MTV and Spotify. And if you want to learn how to use these tools that we're talking about to get the best look possible, what I love about this class is that we get through the tools of the trade and terminology and such, but what we do is we get into maximizing your location, sculpting and shooting with natural light. So even if you're not a videographer and you just want to improve your natural light photography skills, this is highly recommended. Skillshare is also incredibly affordable, especially when compared to pricey in-person classes and workshops. An annual subscription is less than $10 a month. So if you want to take this class or any of the others on Skillshare, the first 500 people to use the link in the description will get 2 months of Skillshare for free. Go get inspired, and I want to give a special shout out and thanks to Skillshare for sponsoring this episode of The Art of Photography. So aside from the 50mm f1.0, that's the only lens we actually know that is coming. They had a prototype at the last Fujifilm press conference. It's going to be a really big lens. It's probably going to be beautiful. It's probably also going to be expensive, but there are 3 left, and there's been a lot of speculation as to what these might be. And I think at least one of these is probably going to be some longer telephoto type lens that will be used for sports photography. I'm almost certain that the XT4 was bumped up to an earlier release than what we usually have on a release cycle because the Olympics are this year. They're going to be this summer in Tokyo, and so Fujifilm wanting to have a presence like every other camera company, I think that having the latest model ready for the Summer Olympics was pretty much the MO, and that's why we saw it released so early. It's an incredible camera. I did 2 videos on that. I've had it for a couple days. I unfortunately had to return it today. It's a really exciting camera, and I think they did a wonderful job with it. But I want to talk a little bit about lenses in the context of what we know about the XT4 and where Fujifilm have kind of been headed and what the trade-offs they've been working with are and what we might see in the future. So this, in addition to having a strange lens hood, is the 16mm f1.4. This has an equivalent field of view of a 24mm full-frame lens. I think the 16mm f1.4, I've said this many times in these videos, is probably one of my favorite Fujifilm lenses ever made. It has absolutely beautiful optics. It performs really well, but in all fairness, because it's a wide-angle lens, it's a 16mm lens, it's not hard to get a wide angle to focus really quickly. Now, there is an alternative version of this lens. There's a 16mm f2.8. I did a comparison between the two of them. I think between the two, I mean, obviously the smaller lens has a much lower price point than this one does, but if you want the optics, I think that this is the lens that you've got to get. Another lens that I use all the time is this one, which you see in a lot of the thumbnails for my videos. This is the 35mm f1.4. Now, there are 2 versions of this lens as well. I wasn't a huge fan of the more compact version. I didn't think its autofocus was that great. That could have been the copy that I had. It is at a lower price point, but once again, much like the 16mm f1.4, for me personally, and everybody has to decide what works best for them, optics are more important than speed and ease of use, and so you do lose a little bit of speed with this lens. It's not the newest and the fastest and the latest and greatest, but optically it is absolutely gorgeous. Which brings me to another lens that I use very regularly on the Fujifilm system. This is the 56mm f1.2. Once again, there is a compact sister version of this. It's slightly short. It's a 50mm lens. In full disclosure, I have not tried that one. I pretty much went straight for this one because the f1.2 aperture, going for the optics. optics. Now, what I'm saying, and the reason I'm sharing all this with you, is that your needs in a lens and my needs in a lens might be two different things. Some people need the speed, they need the accuracy, they're shooting sports, they're shooting something that's fast, they're shooting action. Generally speaking, in my world, I don't do that, and I would not recommend the 56mm f1.2 because the autofocus is a little clunky in this lens. That's not an insult to the lens. I am much more into the optics than I am in the speed and the performance, and that's why I went with this lens. And that's what's been great about the Fujifilm system so far, is that they've pretty much offered choices for different photographers. You usually have a compact version that has slightly faster autofocus, and then you have a more wide aperture version that may be slower, but that is the trade-off. Which brings me to this lens, which is the 16 to 55mm f2.8. A lot of people refer to these as red label zooms. There's the red label there. So red label zooms, such as the 16 to 55mm f2.8, or even the wider version, the 8 to 16mm f2.8, these feature fairly wide apertures for a zoom lens, and they are consistent apertures throughout the entire zoom range. They have really high optical quality, but most important, and this is what I want to point out to you guys, is when you see the little LM in the initials following the focal length on the lens, that stands for linear motor. Now, linear motors actually work with a system of rails that your lens element is attached to, and when it acquires focus, it's simply going to slide along those rails to acquire focus. This is much different than the early days where we had rotational actuators. So if you think back to the earliest days of autofocus, when you only had a handful of camera companies that were doing this, people like Minolta, Canon, Nikon, and what we were doing back then is we were just taking the early designs of manual focus lenses and finding a way to get a motor onto that to acquire focus. So they were rotational because that's how you would acquire focus on a lens. Now, there's no problem with getting accuracy out of rotational actuators. They can be extremely accurate. Your bottleneck is going to be speed, just because you have a longer distance to turn the motor than you do when you have new linear actuated motors. So if we're looking at a system that involves the camera side with the ability to drive really high, fast autofocused adjustment speeds, we also need the lenses to be designed to handle those speeds too. This is similar to what Sony were looking at a couple years ago in their vision that ultimately culminated with the A9 and now the A9 II. I think Fujifilm have been kind of chasing that same ideal, and you need two components to that. You have to have the camera side of things, you have to have the technology to drive autofocus that fast, to make adjustments that quickly, and you have to have the lenses designed to physically deal with it too. Once again, this is just speculation, but let me give you a point of comparison. So we have an older lens that is much more lightweight and relatively compact, and there is a compactor version of this. Is compactor even a word? But anyway, we have chosen optics over performance on this design. This is a design that incorporates both. It is much heavier, it is much larger, it is much more expensive. Speculation is going to get me in trouble here. I can't predict the future, and maybe I'm wrong about this whole thing, but what I expect to see from Fujifilm are lenses that incorporate both the performance aspects as well as the optical aspects, and that is very difficult to do with compact form factors such as this. And so it'll be really interesting to see what we get this year with those three lenses. Again, because the Olympics are coming up, I think that's why the XT4 release date was pushed up. I think you can definitely expect to see at least one of those lenses be a sports lens, be it a telephoto or a long prime, something like that. Maybe we get two lenses that are in that neighborhood. Not trying to insult sports photographers, believe me, I have many friends that are sports photographers. I have the utmost respect of what they do because they do it really well. But my point is of the whole world of photography, how many photographers actually have the need to shoot 20 frames a second? I've done that on the Sony cameras and I've done it on the Fujifilm cameras, and what happens is you come home from an event with thousands of images that you've got to go through. What we really need is a system of how to organize those and kind of pick your shot in camera, something like that. And I'm not talking about AI, I'm just talking about a user interface that allows you to do it. It becomes quite cumbersome to do. Who needs 60 adjustments per second on their autofocus algorithm or their auto exposure algorithm? I might argue that that is important because your hit rate goes way up, but it's really interesting. I don't know who needs the kind of speed that we're talking about on any of these cameras, but this is where I'd like to hear from you. So drop me a comment and let me know. And it's why I'm sharing a lot of these lenses with you that I use with the Fujifilm system, like the 35mm f1.4. I've had people leave comments when I've talked about this lens saying, why did you buy that one? The other one's known to be much faster. And to be honest with you, the speed on this one is fine, and I was more interested in the optics, and that's why. And so I want to hear what you guys have to say on this. So drop me a comment, let me know. We'll see what lenses come down the pike this year from Fujifilm. I'm excited either way. It's an amazing time that we live in. Catch you guys in the next video. Until then, later.